So from resolute Iohannes Florio to Iohannes. Hi everyone, welcome back to John Florio channel. I am Mary and I am an expert on John Florio. Today I want to introduce you to an important topic about John Florio, maybe the most important topic about John Florio, the quarrels with his enemies. You should know that John Florio is often described as a learned lexicographer, an erudite author, a meticulous teacher, but the plain truth is that Florio was a magpie, a shrew smart writer whose works are actually the result of a general process of borrowing, translation and adaptation, which is the reason why he was so harshly and viciously attacked during his career. And now let's... wait. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you want to know anything, questions, suggestions about John Florio. Let me know if you like the video. And now, let's begin. A couple of years ago, I read an article titled John Florio Reconsidered. The author, Starnes, underlined that John Florio used a disingenuous method to write his work, a word of words, the first Italian-English dictionary. Why? Because he discovered that Florio borrowed terms from Thomas dictionary, combining two or more entries to make them his own. Despite the great criticism toward Florio, Starnes made a great point that I have never read in Florio's biographies. He pointed out that Florio was attacked during his career not just because he was a foreign, but also for the way he wrote. Starnes made an analysis of Florio's A Word of Words, but this is the same exact thing that he did for his other works. If we look, for example, at first fruits and second fruits, they are bilingual language lessons manuals in Italian and English, structured in dramatic dialogues. To write these works, Florio used many sources. For example, to write First Fruits, Florio used Ore di ricreazione by Ludovico Guicciardini, James Sanford translation of Guicciardini's work, Guevara's Libro Aureo in Spanish, Lord Berners' English translation of Guevara's work, Thomas North's version, The Dialogue of Princes. In the Italian column of his dialogues, sometimes he used Portonaris Latrino's translation of Guevara's Libro Aureo, adding his own words and alteration and translation. For the English column, instead, he used his own translation, taking inspiration from the English version of Berners and North and Berthaud de la Grille's French translation of Guevara's work. He also used the works of Boccaccio, Ariosto, Ovid, Plutarch. In short, Florio used all the books and translations available to him, and he edited them, readapting the text in his own personal way to avoid plagiarism. All these works, in fact, were rewritten in Florio's unique stylistic trademark, doublings of noun, verbs, alliteration, pomposity, rhetorical ornament. So, Florio's greatest talent was, first, his love for books, his great library, the great amount of sources that he used and had at command. Second, how he used these sources, these works, how he was able to borrow, translate and rewrite them with his stylistic trademark. That was Florio's genius. Florio's great genius lies in borrowing plots, translating them, and often combining different books and sources to create a new work. but better from his predecessors. But his contemporaries knew it. They knew how he wrote, and many of them harshly attacked him. In his address to the reader of A World of Words, published in 1598, John Florio wrote that since the publication of his last book, Second Fruit, he had been cruelly baited. What happened? Who baited him? I love that Florio acts like he had done nothing bad. He loved to portray himself as the poor victim, the tragic hero, when actually his enemies were right. One of the best informed critics of John Florio was John Eliot. He wrote Orthoepia Gallica, firstly attacking him and describing Florio as Italian Harlequin, mocking his dialogues and his flamboyant personality. Florio had much more success than Eliot as tutor, but Eliot knew that Florio was gaining such a huge success among London's most important patrons for what other men had done. For this reason, he considered Florio a dangerous social climber, and he wasn't the only one. Hugh Sanford, the Earl of Pembroke's secretary, was another enemy of John Florio. At the time, Florio was involved as anonymous editor of Philip Sidney Arcadia with Fulk Greville and Matthew Greene. Hugh Sanford published a second edition of the same work with the Countess of Pembroke, and he was deeply displeased of how they revised this work, and for this reason he attacked John Florio. How? He created an offensive Latin nickname from Florio's pen name, Resolute Iohannes Florius. And in the address to the reader of A World of Words, John Florio replied. That's how we know that he was attacked. Florio always replied to everyone. And in fact, he wrote, "This fellow, the H.S. Hugh Sanford, under my last epistle to the reader, I.F., made as familiar a word of F as if I had been his brother." What happened? Under the last epistle of Second Fruits, Florio signed himself as Resolute Iohannes F. Resolute Iohannes Florius. So Sanford, the funny guy, transformed his last name Florio in an offensive Latin nickname. So from Resolute Iohannes Florio to Iohannes something. John Florio replied in similar vein and made rude Latin nicknames of Sanford initials, demonstrating that he could do the same thing in several other languages too. In fact, Florio wrote, "And might not the man find as much matter out of HS as you did out of IF, as for example, HS, why may not stand as well for heres stultitiae, as for homo simplex, or for haros villina, as for hostis studiosorum, or for hircus satiricus, as well as for any of them. And this is in Latin, besides hedera seguace, harpia subata, humore superbo, hypocrito simulatore in Italian. And in English, words without end, half snuff, horse stealer, hobsauter, hussop, Humphrey's winehead." John Eliot and Hugh Sanford didn't just see John Florio as a foreign, as enough English, who has success among the most important London literary circles, but as a magpie who needs stuff from everywhere, dictionaries, prose narratives, history books, and other manuals. A social climber who wrote his works by translating, borrowing, rewriting, and adapting European works for the English readers. Moreover, and this is the most important fact, Florio was not just a tutor or a translator. He had many employments. He worked as a spy for Francis Walsingham and Queen Elizabeth I. He worked as a servant, as personal secretary, as legal representative, agent, emissary. When he was employed under an aristocrat, he didn't just work as tutor, he became as useful as possible. For example, when he worked with the Earl of Southampton, he was even involved in the murder of Henry Long, a young man who was killed by Southampton friend Henry Dunbar. When Southampton knew that his friend had killed Henry Long, he hired John Florio to find the sheriff of Southampton and tell him to stop investigating on the case. And Florio did it. He found the sheriff of Southampton gross, and he threatened the sheriff to cast him overboard and shut up about the case. And the sheriff never investigated on the case ever again. Another example, when Florio wrote Second Fruits, he wrote a dialogue describing himself and Harry. He didn't describe himself and Harry as tutor and student relationship. He described himself and Harry going to theatre together, playing at tennis together. Florio was writing about himself. That was the life he was living with Harry. He was first his close friend and then his tutor. And enemies like Hugh Sanford, John Eliot, and you soon discover Thomas Nashe and Robert Greene, they considered themselves as university wits, great erudite authors who couldn't behave like handymans, jack of all the trades, to get the patronage of an aristocrat. Nashe, in fact, tried to get the patronage of Henry, the Earl of Southampton, but he didn't succeed, he failed. In the same period, Florio obtained the same patronage. This is also why Nashe hated Florio so much. Florio was not a simple tutor. He was first a close friend of his patrons, doing everything he could to please them, and after he was a tutor too. Florio didn't attend any university. He was no wit. He was a self-made man. He loved books and certainly had a genius for reading, borrowing words, plots from his favorite author to translate them and use these important sources in his literary circles. Thomas Nashe was probably Florio's greatest enemy. In Second Fruits, Florio mentions both Greene and Nashe, and he defines Greene's works as molehill. Thomas Nashe believed that time invested in producing art, in writing, counts very much, while John Florio in Second Fruits replied to Nashe that it's not about the time that counts, it's the ideas. You can write something in 2 days and it's still a great idea. You don't have to spend years to write something great. But how you get so many ideas so fast? By borrowing, translating, stealing from others.
Mrs. Frances Yates, in her book A Study of Love's Labors Lost, writes that Sir William Vaughan, Florio's friend, in his work The Spirit of Detraction, defends John Florio from Nashe's attack that had described him as an empty head, someone who just copies.
The reason behind this attack comes from Florio's activity as a translator. It was seen mainly as a plagiarism and not as an activity of university wits like Nashe and Greene, who wanted to create something completely new without borrowing or translating from other authors. But Florio replied to Nashe by pointing out that he had been in Cambridge for 3 years and he wrote nothing, not completing his studies, underlined that you don't need to be in such cultured place to write something good. Sometimes you can find a pearl in the lowest place. Florio's biographers have shown the world all the attacks that Florio received during his career, but they fail to explain what was really going on between Florio and his enemies. For example, Yates described Florio as a friend of Thomas Nashe, distorting what was really going on. Sometimes they focus only on Florio's foreign origin and how he described himself as an Englishman in Italian, or how some Englishmen saw foreigners. An Englishman in Italian is a devil incarnate, or how Florio wrote, "My enemies have a knife at command to cut my throat." Certainly, if Florio wrote this, it means that he was certainly attacked, personally threatened by his enemies. And this is also the reason why he so often preferred to work anonymously and to write as ghostwriter. He was in danger. Fortunately, he was protected by the most important patrons of England. But his foreign origins were only a part of the problem, a piece of the whole puzzle. The real issue is that John Florio was attacked not just because he was half Italian, but also for the way he wrote. His borrowing from other tongues, we now realize, was a major reason for the expansiveness of English language. As he himself wrote in the preface of Montaigne says, Giordano Bruno told him that from translation all science had its offspring. What does this mean? He understood that by borrowing words, plots from other languages, sources and authors, translating, rewriting and adapting those sources for the English readers, a new beautiful science will have flourished in England. In fact, in the preface of Montaigne says, he wrote, I am no thief. What do the best then, but glean after other harvests, borrow their colours, inherit their possession? What do they but translate? Perhaps to soup? At the least collect? In this beautiful defense of translation, Montaigne says, John Florio wasn't defending the general art of translation, he was defending himself. From the attacks that he had received, he was defending his art of translation. Florio didn't consider himself a thief. He was genuinely in love with books and wanted to share his love for them, so he transported European literature in England through translations. And he replied to his enemies by making a good point. There is nothing new under the sun. You will never write an idea completely new that has never been written before. John Florio's genius does not lie in his erudition, but in the creative way he contributed to English language and to English literature. Despite the attacks, the criticism, the death threats, he kept on writing and collaborating, even anonymously, to complete his project by borrowing, translating, and adapting plots of his predecessors to make better the works of others. Stay resolute. Bye.